The chamber floated in the darkness between stars, a massive ring of metal and light that had witnessed 10,000 years of galactic history. Inside its curved walls, representatives from 847 species gathered for what they believed would be a routine vote. The air processors worked overtime to accommodate breathing mixtures for beings who had evolved under different suns, on worlds with different gravities, with different ideas about what constituted life itself. Ambassador Marcus Webb stood at the speaker's platform, a small human figure dwarfed by the towering delegates around him. His gray suit looked pathetic next to the elaborate environmental suits, the floating gas creatures, the crystalline entities that thought in frequencies humans couldn't hear. He had prepared his speech for 3 months, rehearsing every word, every gesture. Now, as he looked out at the assembled representatives, he saw something in their eyes that made his carefully prepared words feel useless. They had already decided. "Honored delegates," Marcus began, his voice amplified across the vast chamber. "I come before you today to speak for 7 billion souls. Earth is young, yes. We are newcomers to this grand community. But we are a thinking species. We feel pain. We love our children. We dream of futures where—" "We have reviewed your species extensively," interrupted Counselor Vrath, a being that resembled a floating jellyfish made of blue light. His voice echoed with harmonic overtones. "Your kind has been observed for 200 of your years. Your nature is clear." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "Our nature? We've worked hard to prove ourselves worthy of—" "Worthy?" Another voice, this one belonging to Thexar Prime, leader of the Thexian Empire. The massive reptilian creature leaned forward, his golden eyes fixed on Marcus. "Your species wages war constantly. In the time we have observed you, you have fought over 200 major conflicts. Your world is divided into competing factions that cannot agree on basic cooperation." "We're improving," Marcus said, hearing the desperation creep into his voice. "In the last century, we've reduced global conflicts by 40%. We've established the United Earth Council. You adapt too quickly," said a delegate from the Caldrith Collective, her 4 arms gesturing in what Marcus had learned was their expression of distaste. "In 200 years, you went from primitive combustion engines to quantum drives. You reverse-engineered our technology after seeing it only once. This is not normal. This is dangerous." Marcus looked around the chamber, searching for friendly faces. The Vrex delegate, an insectoid being with compound eyes that reflected the chamber's light in rainbow patterns, remained perfectly still. They had been kind to him in private conversations, but now they said nothing. "Dangerous?" Marcus said, his voice rising. "We're dangerous because we learn? Because we grow? Every species here went through the same process. The Thexians had their warring clans period. The Caldrith had their unification wars. Why are we being judged differently?" Counselor Vrath pulsed with brighter light. "Because you refuse to accept your place. Every species that joins the Galactic Council understands the hierarchy. The elder races guide. The younger races follow. You humans question everything. You demand equality before you have earned it. You negotiate when you should obey. This is the pattern of a species that will never fit into civilized society." Marcus felt the words like physical blows. He had spent 5 years on this station, building relationships, attending endless diplomatic functions, learning the customs of hundreds of alien cultures. And now he understood that none of it had mattered. They had been studying Earth not to welcome humanity, but to judge it. "What are you proposing?" Marcus asked quietly. The chamber fell silent. Thexar Prime rose to his full height, nearly 4 meters tall, his scales gleaming under the chamber lights. "The Council has reviewed Earth's status. We have consulted the archives. We have debated for many cycles. The conclusion is unanimous among the elder species. Earth represents a Category 4 uncontrolled development risk. Marcus knew what that meant. He had studied galactic law during his journey to the station. Category 4 risks were species deemed too dangerous to integrate into galactic society, but too primitive to be treated as equals. "You're going to enslave us," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We prefer the term managed development," said a delegate from the consortium core, a species that looked like floating brains encased in mechanical bodies. "Earth will be designated a resource world. Your population will be relocated to facilities where they can be properly supervised. The productive members of your species will be assigned to appropriate labor roles throughout the galaxy. Your genetic material shows promise for military applications. Your aggression and adaptability will be useful in our frontier conflicts." Marcus gripped the platform's edge so hard his knuckles turned white. "You're talking about breaking up our families, taking people from their homes, using us as soldiers in your wars." "You misunderstand," Counselor Vrath said, his tone almost gentle. "This is for your own protection as much as ours. Left alone, your species will either destroy itself or become a threat to galactic peace. Under our guidance, individual humans can have productive lives. You will be fed, housed, and given purpose." "As slaves," Marcus repeated. "As resources," Thexar Prime corrected. "The vote will now commence. All in favor of Earth Subjugation Resolution 8847H, indicate now." Marcus watched as, one by one, lights appeared above the delegates. Blue for agreement, red for opposition. The blue lights multiplied across the chamber like stars being born. Species he had shared meals with, cultures he had studied and respected, all of them voting to enslave his world. The red lights never came. Not one. When the final count appeared on the central display, Marcus felt his legs weaken. 846 votes in favor. 0 opposed. 1 abstention. He looked toward the Vrex delegate, the only being who had not voted. The insectoid's antennae twitched in a pattern Marcus didn't recognize. "The resolution passes," Counselor Vrath announced. "The consortium enforcement fleet will proceed to the Sol system immediately. Ambassador Webb, you will be detained here until the operation is complete. We will ensure you are treated well." Marcus found his voice, though it sounded strange to his own ears, hollow and distant. "You're making a mistake." Thexar Prime laughed, a sound like grinding stones. "Small species always say this. You are the 73rd world we have uplifted through managed development. In time, you will understand this was necessary." "I'm not talking about morality," Marcus said, meeting the reptilian's golden eyes. "I'm talking about practicality. You've studied us for 200 years and you still don't understand what you're dealing with." "Enlighten us," said the Kaldrith delegate, her tone mocking. Marcus straightened, feeling something cold settle in his chest. "We're a species that has survived ice ages, plagues, and world wars. We've split the atom. We've walked on our moon. We've turned deserts into gardens and created art that moves us to tears. And you know what every human child learns in school? That bullies always fall. Always. It might take time, but they fall." "Primitive defiance," Counselor Vrath said dismissively. "Guards, escort the ambassador to his quarters." As robotic sentries moved toward him, Marcus spoke one last time. "When you go to Earth, you'll see families. Children playing in parks, old people sitting on benches, feeding birds, artists and scientists and farmers and teachers. You'll see us living our lives, and then you'll take all of that away." He paused. "Just remember, when this comes back to haunt you, that you were warned. Not by a warrior or a politician, but by a diplomat who spent 5 years trying to show you we could be friends." The guards reached him, their metal hands surprisingly gentle as they guided him away from the platform. As Marcus left the chamber, he turned back one last time. The delegates were already moving to other business. filing reports, discussing logistics. The subjugation of an entire species was, to them, just another item on the agenda. Only the Vrex delegate remained still, watching Marcus leave. Their antennae formed a pattern that looked almost like a salute. 3 weeks later, the consortium fleet arrived in Earth's orbit. 7,000 warships, the largest force assembled in 500 years. They came from all corners of the galaxy, representatives from dozens of species united in their purpose. In Beijing, a girl named Li Mei stood on her apartment balcony, watching the sky turn silver. She was 7 years old, and she had never seen anything so terrible and beautiful at the same time. The ships stretched from horizon to horizon, blotting out the stars, blocking the sun. It was like someone had built a roof over the entire world. Her mother came out and wrapped her arms around Li Mei, pulling her close. "Come inside, baby." "Mama, what are those?" Li Mei asked, though she already knew. Everyone knew. The broadcasts had been running for 3 days, ever since the first ships had been detected past Mars. "They're visitors," her mother said, her voice shaking. "Bad visitors?" Her mother didn't answer. She didn't need to. Li Mei could feel her trembling. Around the world, similar scenes played out. In New York, traffic stopped as people stood in the streets, staring upward. In Mumbai, prayers filled the air as millions gathered in temples and churches and mosques. In Lagos, Rio de Janeiro, Moscow, Tokyo, and 10,000 other cities, humanity looked up at the Armada and understood that their lives were about to change forever. The broadcast came at noon, Greenwich Mean Time. Every screen on Earth, every device, every display showed the same image: Counselor Vrath, his blue light pulsing with what might have been satisfaction. "People of Earth," the translated voice said, "by order of the Galactic Council, your world has been designated for managed development. This is not a negotiation. You will comply with the following instructions or face immediate consequences. All government officials will surrender within 24 hours. All military forces will stand down. All citizens will remain in their homes and await processing. You will not be harmed if you comply. Resistance will be met with appropriate force." The broadcast ended. For a moment, the entire planet seemed to hold its breath. Then the screaming started. Li Mei's mother pulled her inside, locking the door as if that would help. Outside, Li Mei could hear shouting, crying, the sound of breaking glass. Her father came home early from work, his face pale and sweaty. He gathered them both into a hug that felt desperate. "We'll be okay," he whispered. But Li Mei knew he was lying. Adults lied when they were scared. She had learned that during the pandemic when she was younger. On her tablet, still clutched in her small hand, Li Mei saw news feeds from around the world. Some governments were already surrendering. Others were calling for resistance. Military jets were launching. But what could they do against 7,000 alien warships? In her child's mind, Li Mei tried to understand what slavery meant. She knew it from history lessons, people being taken from their homes, forced to work, treated like property. She knew it was wrong. Everyone knew it was wrong. So why was it happening again? That night, as Li Mei lay in bed, unable to sleep, she heard her parents whispering in the next room. Her father was crying, something she had never heard before. Her mother was making a sound like an animal in pain. Li Mei got up quietly and crept to their door, listening. "The reports from Australia are confirmed," her father said. "They're taking people, millions of them, loading them into ships. The government tried to fight in Sydney. They destroyed the entire city, just erased it. 8 million people gone in seconds." Her mother sobbed. "What do we do?" "We comply. We hope. We pray they don't separate us." Li Mei returned to her bed and stared at the ceiling. Through her window, she could still see the silver sky, the ships that had stolen the stars. She was 7 years old, and she was old enough to understand that her life, her world, her future had just ended. But she was also young enough to make a promise to herself, the kind of promise children make before the world teaches them that some fights can't be won. She promised that someday, somehow, she would see real stars again. Not the silver ships of monsters who thought humans were nothing but resources to be used and discarded. Real stars, in a real sky, above a free earth. It was a child's dream, impossible and naive. But children sometimes grow up, and sometimes their dreams grow with them into something the universe has never seen before. 5 years passed like a slow death. The world that Li Mei had known ceased to exist on the day the ships came. Within a month, every major city had been occupied. The consortium forces landed not with armies, but with administrative efficiency, treating Earth like a warehouse to be cataloged and emptied. They set up processing centers in what used to be stadiums, convention halls, and airports. Humans lined up by the millions, sorted by age, health, and potential utility. The strong and healthy were shipped off-world first, packed into cargo vessels designed for livestock. Li Mei's father was taken in the 3rd month. He had been an engineer before the invasion, and the consortium determined that made him useful. She remembered his face as the guards led him away, how he tried to smile at her one last time, pretending everything would be fine. She never saw him again. Her mother lasted another year before she was selected for a medical research facility on a moon orbiting a star whose name Li Mei couldn't pronounce. The Kaldrith scientists were interested in human reproductive systems, studying how humans could be bred more efficiently for specific tasks. When the guards came for her mother, Li Mei screamed and fought, her 12-year-old fists useless against their armored bodies. The last thing her mother said was, "Remember who you are." Li Mei ended up in a youth labor facility in what used to be Nevada. 2,000 children and teenagers, all orphaned by the occupation, all assigned to mining operations in the desert. The consortium was extracting rare Earth elements that Earth governments had deemed too expensive to reach. But with human slave labor costing nothing but minimal food and shelter, suddenly everything was profitable. The work was brutal. 12-hour shifts in tunnels that were too hot and too dark, breathing air thick with dust, moving rocks by hand because the consortium wouldn't waste advanced equipment on human workers. Children as young as 8 operated machinery designed for adults. Accidents were common. Death was regular. The bodies were incinerated without ceremony. But the consortium made a mistake that would prove fatal. They assumed that humans, like most species they had subjugated, would eventually accept their fate. That broken spirits would stay broken, that suffering would lead to compliance. They didn't understand that humans had spent thousands of years building civilizations on suffering, creating beauty from pain, finding hope in darkness. They didn't understand that there is a point where you've taken everything from someone and they have nothing left to lose. And a human with nothing to lose is the most dangerous creature in the universe. Underground, in ways the consortium couldn't detect, the resistance grew. It started small. Workers sabotaging equipment just enough to slow production without getting caught. Guards finding their rations mysteriously spoiled. Communications between facilities developing unexplained glitches. The consortium noticed but dismissed it as typical inefficiency from primitive beings learning to work in advanced systems. They missed what was really happening. In a hidden facility carved into the ice beneath Antarctica, Dr. Sarah Chen coordinated the largest scientific project in human history. She had been an admiral in the UN Space Force before the invasion, one of the few military leaders who had escaped the initial roundup. For 5 years, she had lived like a ghost, moving between secret bases, gathering the scattered remnants of Earth's best minds. Scientists who had been scheduled for execution found their transport ships mysteriously redirected. Engineers who had been sent to processing centers were reported dead in system glitches. Their bodies never recovered because they didn't exist. Slowly, impossibly, Chen assembled a team of 2,000 of Earth's brightest people, all of them working toward a single goal. The facility was enormous, carved from ice and rock over the course of years by automated systems stolen from consortium mining operations. Inside, humanity's last free researchers worked on problems that should have been impossible. Chen stood in the central laboratory, watching dozens of scientists huddled around displays, arguing over equations that described physics no human should have understood yet. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her face showed the weight of 5 years living in hiding. She was 53 years old and felt like she was 90. "Admiral, we've got another success," called out Dr. James Okonkwo, a quantum physicist who had been pulled from a processing center in Lagos 3 years ago. His hands shook as he typed, not from fear, but from exhaustion and barely controlled excitement. Chen walked over, her boots clicking on the metal floor. "Show me." The display showed a simulation that made her head hurt to look at. Particles that existed in 2 places simultaneously, space folding in on itself, energy states that violated every law of physics she had learned in her military training. "We can do it," Okonkwo said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We can actually do it." "In English, James," Chen said. He turned to face her and she saw tears in his eyes. "We can weaponize quantum entanglement. We can create weapons that strike across galactic distances instantly. We can hit targets on the other side of the galaxy without ships, without travel time, just instantaneous destruction." Chen felt her heart rate increase. "How?" "By being irrational," Okonkwo said with a laugh that sounded slightly unhinged. "The consortium species all think logically. They follow rules. They obey physical laws. But humans, we look at the impossible and ask, but what if? We try things that shouldn't work, and sometimes," he gestured at the simulation, "sometimes they do." Another scientist, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, joined them. She had been one of the first rescued, pulled from a breeding facility where the consortium had been studying human genetics. She never talked about what had happened there, but Chen had seen the scars. "It's more than that," Tanaka said. "We've been studying the consortium technology for 5 years. We understand how it works now. And we've found the weaknesses." She pulled up another display, showing the molecular structure of the metal used in consortium ships. They use quantum-locked alloys, incredibly strong, nearly indestructible by conventional weapons. But quantum-locked means the molecular bonds are stable because they exist in a specific quantum state. If you destabilize that state, the ships fall apart, Chen finished. "Not just fall apart," Tanaka corrected. "They cease to exist at a molecular level. Every atom simultaneously tries to occupy all possible quantum states. The result is a cascade reaction that destroys everything in a radius of several kilometers." Chen looked between them. "How long until we can build a prototype?" "We already have," Okonkwo said. "We've had 3 for the past month. We were waiting to perfect the delivery system." "And have you?" "Yes, Admiral." This came from a new voice. Major Carlos Rivera, her second-in-command, approached with a tablet. He had been a pilot before the invasion, and his wife and children had been taken to separate facilities across the galaxy. He had nothing left but revenge. "We've been building ships," Rivera said. "Not in space where they can see, but in underground facilities across the planet. We started with designs reverse-engineered from their technology, then improved them, made them faster, more maneuverable, harder to detect." "How many?" Chen asked. 200, Rivera said. "Not enough to match their fleet in a straight fight, but with our new weapons." He smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "We don't need to match them. We just need to hurt them badly enough that they can't control us anymore." Chen nodded slowly, processing the information. 5 years of hiding, of watching her species suffer, of listening to reports of humans dying in mines and laboratories and gladiatorial arenas across the galaxy. 5 years of carefully building a resistance while pretending to be defeated. "There's something else," Tanaka said quietly. "We intercepted consortium communications last month. They're distributing human children across 200 worlds as domestic servants, training them young to be obedient. The youngest are being sent to wealthy families as pets." Chen felt something inside her chest twist. She thought of her own daughter, killed during the initial invasion when Beijing was bombed for resistance. She thought of all the children like Li Mei, stolen from their families, worked to death in mines or laboratories. "How long to get all systems operational?" she asked, her voice cold and controlled. 2 weeks, Rivera said. "We can launch in 2 weeks. Chen looked around the facility at the men and women who had sacrificed everything for this moment. They were exhausted, half-starved, running on nothing but hate and hope. They were the last free humans, the only ones who could fight back. "We're not going to fight fairly," she said. "We're not going to follow their rules or show mercy. They came to our world and treated us like animals. We're going to show them what happens when animals fight back." She walked to the center of the room and activated the facility's main communication system. All across Earth, in hidden bases and secret facilities, humans who had been waiting for this moment received her broadcast. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen. For 5 years, we have suffered. We have lost everything, our families, our homes, our freedom. The consortium thought they could break us. They thought we would accept enslavement like the 72 species before us." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "They were wrong. In 2 weeks, we strike. Every hidden facility, every resistance cell, every human slave who can access a weapon will act simultaneously. We're going to take back Earth, and then—" Her voice dropped to barely more than a whisper, but somehow it carried more weight than shouting. "Then we're going to teach the galaxy why you don't enslave humanity." Around the world, in mines and facilities and slave quarters, humans received the message. Some cried. Some prayed. Some simply smiled for the first time in 5 years. In Nevada, Li Mei was working her shift in the tunnel when the message reached her through a secretly modified communication device. She was 17 now, no longer the child who had watched the ships arrive. The work had made her strong, the suffering had made her hard, and the hate had kept her alive. She listened to Chen's words and felt something ignite in her chest. It was rage, yes, but it was more than that. It was purpose. It was the promise she had made herself as a 7-year-old girl, finally within reach. She looked at the other workers in the tunnel, all of them listening to the same message. They were children, most of them, aged beyond their years by labor and loss. They looked back at her, and she saw the same fire in their eyes. 2 weeks, she said quietly. 2 weeks, they repeated. Above them, in orbit, the consortium occupation forces continued their work, confident in their control. They had subjugated 72 species before. They knew how this worked. Resistance was always temporary. Suffering always led to compliance. It was the natural order of things. They had no idea that beneath their feet, in tunnels and bunkers and hidden facilities, humanity was preparing to introduce them to a new order, one written in blood and quantum fire, one that would teach the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. The breaking of humanity was complete, but the consortium had misunderstood what they were seeing. Humans hadn't broken down. They had broken free from restraint, from mercy, from everything that made them civilized. And civilized humans were dangerous enough. But uncivilized humans, humans with nothing to lose and everything to avenge, were about to become the galaxy's worst nightmare. The attack began at midnight. Greenwich Mean Time, in every time zone simultaneously. The consortium forces had grown comfortable in their 5 years of occupation, confident that the broken humans posed no real threat. Their first warning came when their orbital platforms started exploding. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center beneath Antarctica, watching displays that showed Earth from a dozen hidden satellites. The planet was lighting up like a funeral pyre. Every major city, every processing center, every slave facility erupted in coordinated violence as millions of humans struck back at once. Orbital defense platforms 3 through 17 are offline, reported Major Rivera from the tactical station. The nuclear charges worked perfectly. They never saw them coming. Chen nodded, her face emotionless. The nuclear weapons had been primitive compared to consortium technology, but humans had spent decades perfecting them. And the consortium had never thought to scan for such crude devices because no civilized species used nuclear weapons anymore. They were too dirty, too unpredictable, too barbaric. But humans had never claimed to be civilized. "Launch the fleet," Chen ordered. From hidden bases beneath the ice of Antarctica, the seas off Norway, the deserts of Australia, and the jungles of the Amazon, 200 warships emerged. They looked crude compared to the elegant vessels of the consortium, cobbled together from stolen technology and human engineering, but they moved with deadly purpose, accelerating toward the consortium fleet in orbit. The alien ships scrambled to respond. 7,000 vessels against 200 should have been a slaughter. The consortium commanders were already calculating victory, already planning their retaliation against the surface cities. They never got the chance. The first human ship, the Defiance, came within range of a consortium cruiser and fired its quantum disruption weapon. To the alien crew, nothing seemed to happen. No beam of light, no missile, no visible attack. Then every atom in their ship's hull simultaneously tried to exist in all possible quantum states at once. The cruiser didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist as matter, transforming into an expanding cloud of energy that destroyed 6 other consortium ships nearby. "Target destroyed," Rivera reported, his voice shaking with something between horror and satisfaction. "Moving to next target." Around Earth, the battle became a nightmare for the consortium. Their ships were stronger, their weapons more advanced, their tactics refined over thousands of years. But humans had built their entire fleet around a single purpose: killing ships that should have been unkillable. The quantum disruption weapons tore through consortium vessels like paper. The kinetic planet crackers, missiles accelerated to relativistic speeds, hit with the force of nuclear weapons but left no radiation, and the human pilots flew with a recklessness that terrified the alien crews. They didn't try to avoid damage. They rammed enemy ships when their weapons ran dry. They detonated their own reactors to take out nearby vessels. They fought like they had nothing to lose because they didn't. On the surface, Li Mei led her group of former slaves in an assault on their facility's command center. They had no training, no military experience, but they had spent 5 years learning every weakness in the facility's defenses, every gap in the guard rotations, every flaw in the security systems. They had also spent 5 years remembering everyone who had died in the tunnels. The consortium guards were Thexian soldiers, the same species whose leader had voted for Earth's enslavement. They were trained warriors, each one worth 10 humans in combat. But there were 20 guards and 300 furious teenagers armed with mining tools and stolen weapons. The fight was brief and brutal. Li Mei killed her first living being that night, driving a plasma cutter through a guard's armor while he was reloading. She didn't feel guilt or horror. She felt nothing but a cold satisfaction as the body fell. When the facility was secure, Li Mei stood in the command center, looking at the communications console. She could see feeds from around the world. Humans were winning, facilities were falling, guards were dying. For the first time in 5 years, her species was fighting back. She opened a channel to every consortium frequency she could access and spoke in a voice that didn't shake. "This is Earth. We're done being your slaves." In orbit, the battle turned into a rout. The consortium fleet tried to retreat, tried to regroup, but the human ships pursued them with mechanical efficiency. They had been designed for exactly this, fighting in Earth's orbit against superior numbers with inferior individual ships, but vastly superior weapons. Within 24 hours, the orbital battle was over. Of the 7,000 consortium vessels, 3,000 were destroyed outright. 2,000 were crippled and boarded by human teams who killed the crews without mercy. The remaining 2,000 fled into deep space, broadcasting distress signals to the Council. The cost to humanity was high. 90 of the 200 ships were destroyed. 12,000 resistance fighters died, but Earth was free. Admiral Chen stood on the surface for the first time in 5 years, looking up at a sky that was no longer silver with alien ships. Bodies littered the landscape around the former processing centers. Human and alien corpses mixed together in death. The air smelled of smoke and blood and burned metal. Rivera approached her, his uniform torn and blood-stained. "Admiral, we're receiving communications from the Council. They want to negotiate." "No," Chen said simply. "Ma'am?" Chen turned to face him, and Rivera took an involuntary step back from what he saw in her eyes. "They came to our world. They took our families. They worked our children to death in mines. They bred us like animals. They thought we were resources." She smiled, and it was the coldest thing Rivera had ever seen. "Now we show them what resources can do." She walked back toward the command center, leaving Rivera standing in the ruins. Around the world, similar scenes played out. Humans standing in the wreckage of their former prisons, looking up at free skies, and realizing that freedom wasn't enough. They wanted revenge. In the hidden facility now brought to the surface, Chen convened her war council. Scientists, soldiers, and former slaves all gathered around the strategic display that showed the galaxy in 3 dimensions. 847 species spread across millions of star systems. "They voted unanimously," Chen said, her voice echoing in the chamber. 846 species voted to enslave us. Only the Vrex abstained. That means 846 species are legitimate targets. "Admiral," Dr. Okonkwo said carefully, "what exactly are you proposing?" Chen touched the display and hundreds of star systems lit up in red. "We have quantum disruption weapons that work across galactic distances. We have the coordinates of every Council species' homeworld. We have 5 years of intercepted communications that tell us where they're weak." She looked around the room. "And we have millions of humans scattered across 200 worlds as slaves. Humans who are waiting for a signal to act." The room fell silent as they understood what she was suggesting. "We're going to war," Chen continued. "Not a defensive war. Not a war of liberation, a war of extinction. We're going to hit every world that voted for our enslavement. We're going to destroy their infrastructure, collapse their economies, kill their populations. We're going to teach the galaxy what happens when you mistake mercy for weakness." "That's genocide," Tanaka said quietly. "Yes," Chen agreed, "just like what they planned for us. The only difference is we're going to succeed." "Some of our people are on those worlds," Rivera pointed out. "Slaves in facilities, servants in homes. If we attack, we'll kill them too." Chen nodded slowly. "I know, but if we don't attack, they stay slaves forever. And their children become slaves. And their children's children." She paused. "We sent a message to all human slaves through encrypted channels. We told them what we're planning. We told them they have 1 week to escape or prepare. After that, we strike every Council world simultaneously." She activated another display, showing the intercepted communication that Tanaka had discovered. Images of human children being trained as servants, being collared and leashed like pets, being bought and sold in markets. "They took our children," Chen said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "They scattered them across 200 worlds like party favors. Some of you might think we should be cautious, that we should be strategic, that we should show mercy." She looked around the room. "I'm not interested in mercy. I'm interested in making sure this never happens again." "How?" asked a young officer who had lost his entire family in the first month of occupation. Chen smiled. "By making humanity so terrifying that no species ever considers enslaving us again. By turning our name into a curse word. By making mothers across the galaxy tell their children to behave or the humans will come for them." She pulled up the final display, showing the Vrek's homeworld. "There's one species that didn't vote for our enslavement. The Vreks abstained. They get a pass. Everyone else is a target. Over the next week, human sleeper agents activated across 200 worlds. The slaves that the consortium had scattered across the galaxy, thinking they were helpless resources, revealed themselves to be something very different. They were soldiers behind enemy lines, waiting for the signal. On Thexar Prime, a human servant named Marcus Webb, the former ambassador, now enslaved to a council member's household, walked into the Planetary Defense Center with a bomb strapped to his chest. He had lived as a slave for 5 years, biding his time, gathering intelligence. Before he detonated, he uploaded every security code and defensive position to Earth. His last words, broadcast across all frequencies, were simple. "You should have listened." On Caldrith Secundus, 300 human slaves seized control of a weapons facility and turned the planet's own defense satellites against its surface. By the time Caldrith forces retook the facility, 6 major cities had been reduced to rubble. On Consortium Core World 7, human gladiators revolted during a grand tournament, killing the audience of 70,000 in 15 minutes of systematic slaughter. The reports flooded into Earth's command center. Success after success, sabotage, assassination, destruction. The galaxy's slave population, which the Council had thought of as conquered and broken, revealed itself to be an army of ghosts, striking from within. Admiral Chen watched the reports with satisfaction. "Send the message," she ordered. "Across every consortium frequency, every diplomatic channel, every emergency broadcast system." Humanity's ultimatum reached the Council. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of Earth. 5 years ago, you came to our world and enslaved us. You thought we were resources. You thought we were weak. You made a mistake." The message showed footage of the battle for Earth, of consortium ships being destroyed, of facilities burning, of human slaves striking back across the galaxy. "We have your children now. Not literally, not yet. But we have weapons pointed at every Council homeworld. Weapons that can strike instantly, across any distance. Weapons that will turn your planets into dead rocks." Chen's face appeared on the screen, and even through the transmission, her fury was palpable. "You voted unanimously for our extinction. We're offering you the same choice. Surrender completely or die completely. You have 1 week to decide." The transmission ended. In the Council chambers, now frantically evacuated from their orbital station to a supposedly secure facility, the delegates panicked. Some called for total war, others for immediate surrender. A few simply sat in shock, unable to believe that their primitive slave species had somehow gained the power to threaten entire civilizations. Only the Vrek's delegate remained calm. Their antennae twitched in a pattern that other species had learned meant deep thought. "What are you thinking?" asked the Caldrith representative, her 4 arms trembling with fear. "I am thinking," the Vrex said slowly, "that we should have voted differently 5 years ago. But we abstained. We didn't vote for enslavement." "No," the Vrex agreed. "But we didn't vote against it either. We were cowards. And now we are watching a species that does not forgive cowardice or complicity." Across the galaxy, Human ships emerged from hiding places in asteroid belts and dead star systems. They weren't exploration vessels or diplomatic ships. They were weapons, pure and simple, designed with one purpose: carrying quantum disruption devices to council worlds. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see if humanity would actually follow through on their threat. Admiral Chen already knew the answer. She had known it from the moment she watched Beijing burn 5 years ago. She had known it from listening to reports of children dying in mines. She had known it from seeing the images of human families torn apart. Mercy was for species that hadn't been enslaved. Humanity was done with mercy. The week passed. The Council sent no response. They mobilized their fleets instead, calling in defense forces from across the galaxy. Thousands of warships gathered at strategic points, forming defensive perimeters around the most important worlds. They thought humanity was bluffing. No species could actually build weapons that struck across galactic distances instantaneously. It violated too many physical laws. They were about to learn that humans had never cared much about following rules. Admiral Chen gave the order at exactly midnight, Earth time, 7 days after her ultimatum. No dramatic speech, no last chance for surrender. Just 3 words: execute Strike Alpha. The quantum disruption weapons fired from positions across the galaxy. They had been pre-positioned over months, hidden in asteroid fields and dead systems, waiting for this moment. The consortium thought humans had only 200 ships. They didn't know about the 6,000 automated weapon platforms that had been built in secret. On Thexar Prime, the Thexian homeworld, the attack began at local noon. The sky didn't darken or light up with explosions. Instead, the sun simply went out. Not blocked, not dimmed, but extinguished at a molecular level as the quantum disruption wave passed through it, destabilizing the fusion reactions that had burned for 4 billion years. Within minutes, the temperature began to drop. Within hours, it was below freezing. Within days, the atmosphere would freeze and fall as snow. 4 billion Thexians died on their homeworld, not from explosions or violence, but from cold and darkness, and the slow realization that their sun would never shine again. Humanity had killed a star. The reports came flooding in. The Caldrith Garden worlds, famous throughout the galaxy for their beauty, were targeted with biogenic weapons. Viruses designed specifically for Caldrith biology spread through their interconnected ecosystem. Within a week, every plant on those worlds would be dead. Within a month, the atmosphere would become toxic as decomposition released compounds that made oxygen poisonous to Caldrith lungs. 10 billion Caldrith across 6 worlds were condemned to slow suffocation. The consortium core worlds, those floating brain entities that had designed much of the enslavement protocol, faced a different fate. Human hackers, trained on 5 years of stolen consortium technology, uploaded a virus into their neural network. The core beings existed partially in digital space. Their consciousness spread across vast computer systems. The virus didn't kill them instantly. It trapped them in loops of their own worst memories, playing out eternally. Every mistake, every regret, every moment of pain, experienced forever in digital hell. 17 billion core beings lost their minds in the same instant, their physical bodies continuing to live while their consciousness shattered into screaming fragments. Admiral Chen watched the reports come in with no expression on her face. Around her, the command center worked with mechanical efficiency. Targets confirmed destroyed. Strike packages successful. Collateral damage within acceptable parameters. Acceptable parameters. That's what they call genocide now. Major Rivera approached her station. His face was pale, and his hands shook as he held a tablet. Admiral, I have reports from the human slaves on the targeted worlds. Many of them didn't escape in time. We just killed millions of our own people. I know, Chen said without looking away from the main display. Ma'am, some of them are sending messages. They're asking why. They're asking why we didn't give them more time. Because the Council was monitoring communications, Chen said flatly. Any delay would have given them time to evacuate or strengthen defenses. We gave them a week. That was more mercy than they showed us. This isn't mercy, Rivera said, his voice cracking. This is murder. Mass murder. We're no better than them. Chen finally turned to face him. Her eyes were empty, hollow things that had seen too much and felt too little. You're right. We're not better than them. We're worse. But we're alive and free. And they're dying as slaves and masters. I know which one I prefer. She turned back to the display. Continue strike operations. Target the secondary worlds. I want every species that voted for our enslavement to feel what we felt. Around Earth, voices of dissent began to rise. Not everyone agreed with Chen's total war strategy. Some of the resistance leaders argued for negotiation, for finding a peaceful solution. They were ignored or removed from command positions. Chen had consolidated power during the 5 years of occupation, and now she wielded it with absolute authority. But cracks were forming in humanity's unity. Dr. Tanaka found Chen in her private quarters late one night. The Admiral was staring at a photo of her daughter, the one killed in Beijing during the initial invasion. She was 7 years old in the picture, smiling at the camera, unaware that in a few years she would be dead and her mother would become the greatest mass murderer in galactic history. We need to talk, Tanaka said. No, we don't, Chen replied without looking up. Sarah, we've killed over 100 billion beings in the last month. Entire civilizations are collapsing. The Thexian species is functionally extinct. The Kaldrith will be gone within a year. The core beings are all insane. This is genocide on a scale that matches what they planned for us, Chen interrupted. They were going to scatter humanity across the galaxy as slaves, work us to death, breed us like animals. The only difference between their plan and ours is that we're succeeding. No, Tanaka said firmly. The difference is we're choosing this. Every day, every attack, we're choosing to become monsters. Chen finally looked at her. I became a monster 5 years ago when I watched my daughter die and decided the only thing that mattered was revenge. Everything since then has just been following through. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at Earth's sky, finally clear of alien ships. Do you know what the worst part is? I don't feel anything. I watch the death tolls come in, and I feel nothing. Billions dead, and it's just numbers on a screen. Then stop, Tanaka pleaded. We've made our point. The galaxy knows we can't be enslaved. Let's negotiate. Find a way forward that doesn't involve exterminating hundreds of species. No, Chen said, because the moment we stop, they'll see it as weakness. They'll regroup, rebuild, and come back stronger. The only way to ensure humanity's safety is to make ourselves so terrifying that no one ever considers threatening us again. She pulled up a new display, showing star systems across the galaxy. We have 447 more species to target. 846 voted for our enslavement. We've only hit the biggest civilizations so far. The smaller species think they're safe because they're not strategic targets. They need to learn they're wrong. Sarah, please? I'm tired, Yuki, Chen said, using her first name for the first time in years. I'm so tired, but we're halfway through this, and if we stop now, my daughter died for nothing. All those children who died in the mines died for nothing. So we keep going until every species that hurt us is dead or broken. Tanaka left without another word. She knew Chen was beyond reaching, had been for years. The woman who had been a decorated admiral, who had led forces with honor and distinction, was gone. In her place was something cold and mechanical, a being who had weaponized her own grief. But Tanaka wasn't the only one having doubts. Li Mei, now 19 and commanding a strike force of former slaves, stood on the bridge of her captured consortium cruiser and looked at her orders. She was supposed to attack a colony world of the Drenth species. 300 million Drenth lived there. They were herbivores, a peaceful species who had voted for Earth's enslavement because the Council told them it was necessary for galactic stability. Her tactical officer, a young man named James, who had been enslaved at age 12, spoke up. "Ma'am, I've been reviewing the intelligence on the Drenth. They're not warriors. They have almost no military. This won't be a battle. It'll be a slaughter." Li Mei knew he was right. She had spent 5 years in the mines watching friends die, losing her parents. She had killed consortium guards without hesitation because they were soldiers, combatants, the enemy. But the Drenth colony was full of civilians, families, children who had nothing to do with the decision made by their government years ago. "Those are our orders," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Orders from someone who's lost her mind," James said quietly. "Admiral Chen is committing genocide. We all wanted revenge, but this isn't justice. This is just killing for the sake of killing." Around the bridge, other crew members nodded. They were all former slaves. All had suffered, all had lost people they loved, but they hadn't lost their humanity the way Chen had. Li Mei thought about the promise she had made as a 7-year-old girl. She had wanted to see real stars in a free sky. She had wanted freedom, but she had never wanted to become the thing that had enslaved her in the first place. "Delay the attack," she ordered. "Tell command we're having engine trouble. Buy us some time to think." What Li Mei didn't know was that similar conversations were happening across the human fleet. Young officers and soldiers who had followed Chen's orders without question were starting to ask if revenge had gone too far, if there was a difference between justice and genocide, if winning was worth losing their souls. Meanwhile, one species watched humanity's rampage with growing concern. The Vreks, the only species that had abstained from the vote 5 years ago, had been quietly monitoring humanity's attacks. Their insectoid intelligence had recognized something the other species missed. The Virex Elder, a being named Kuskt, whose chitin had grayed with age, called an emergency meeting of their High Council. In their underground chambers lit by bioluminescent fungi, the Virex leaders gathered. "We must contact the humans," Kuskt said, their antennae forming patterns of urgency. "Why?" asked another elder. "We abstained from their enslavement. We have no guilt in this matter." "No," Kuskt agreed. "But we have wisdom from our own history. 3,000 years ago, our species nearly destroyed itself in revenge wars. We know how this story ends. The humans will kill until there's nothing left to kill, and then they'll turn on each other. Or they'll find themselves alone in a galaxy that hates and fears them. That is their choice to make." "Perhaps," Kezkit said. "But they are young. They are in pain. Sometimes, the young and hurt need elders to show them there is another way." The Vreks had seen this pattern before in their own history. A species wronged, seeking revenge, going too far, becoming isolated and hated. It had taken their civilization centuries to recover from that mistake. The Vreks had abstained from Earth's enslavement, not because they were moral, but because they recognized humanity as apex predators. And every predator eventually learns that killing everything makes you the king of a graveyard. Kazkat sent a message on a frequency they knew Chen monitored. "Admiral Chen of Earth, this is Elder Kuskt of the Vreks Collective. We wish to speak with you, not to negotiate, not to beg for mercy, but to share wisdom from species who have walked your path before. You are halfway through your revenge. We can tell you what waits at the end of that road." Chen received the message and stared at it for a long time. The Vreks had been the only species to abstain, the only ones who hadn't condemned humanity to slavery. Part of her wanted to ignore them, to continue the path of destruction until every guilty species was ashes. But another part of her, a small part she thought had died with her daughter, wondered what the Vreks had to say. She sent a reply. "Speak, then, but make it quick. I have 400 more civilizations to destroy." The galaxy burned, humanity's fury sweeping across star systems like a wildfire. And in the middle of that fire, a small seed of doubt began to grow. Not in everyone, not even in most, but in enough people to matter. The question wasn't whether humanity could destroy the galaxy. They had proven they could. The question was whether they should. And for the first time since the war began, some humans were starting to wonder if revenge was enough. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the communication chamber, facing a holographic projection of Elder Kazakit. The Vrex Elder's compound eyes reflected light in rainbow patterns, their antennae moving in slow, deliberate gestures that Chen had learned to read as careful thought. "You said you've walked this path before," Chen said without preamble. "Explain." Kazat's mandibles clicked in what might have been a sigh. 3,000 years ago, the Vrex were enslaved by a species called the Thorn Empire. For 200 years, they used us as workers in their industrial complexes. They killed 30% of our population through neglect and cruelty. When we finally developed technology advanced enough to fight back, we did what you are doing now. Chen leaned forward. "You won." "Yes," Kazakit agreed. "We won completely. We destroyed the Thorn homeworld. We hunted down their colonies. We killed every single member of their species. 15 billion beings erased from existence. And do you know what we gained? Freedom." "Isolation," Kazakit corrected. The other species in our region of space were horrified. Not at what the Thorns had done to us, but at what we had done in response. They saw us as monsters, dangerous and unpredictable. For 500 years, no species would trade with us, communicate with us, or allow us near their space. We were quarantined like a disease. Chen's expression didn't change. "Better isolated than enslaved." "Is it?" Kazakit's antennae formed a pattern Chen recognized as skepticism. "We lost centuries of cultural development. Our economy collapsed. We turned inward and nearly destroyed ourselves in civil wars over resources. We became the thing we hated, a species that solved all problems with violence. It took us 1,000 years to relearn cooperation, mercy, and trust." "Maybe humans are different," Chen said coldly. "Perhaps," Kazakit acknowledged. "But I suspect not. Already we see signs. Your own forces are fracturing. Officers are questioning orders. Ships are delaying attacks. You have lost 400 civilizations. But how many more before your own people refuse to follow?" Before Chen could respond, an alert sounded. Major Rivera entered the chamber, his face pale. "Admiral, we have a problem. The strike force commanded by Li Mei has refused to attack their target. She's requesting to speak with you directly." Chen's jaw tightened. "Put her through." Li Mei's face appeared on a second holographic display. She looked tired, older than her 19 years, but her eyes were clear and determined. Behind her, Chen could see the bridge of her ship, her crew watching. "Admiral," Li Mei said, "I can't follow this order. The Drenth colony is full of civilians, families, children. I spent 5 years as a slave, and I won't become the same kind of monster that enslaved us." "That's not your decision to make," Chen said, her voice hard. "You follow orders or you face court-martial. Then court-martial me," Li Mei said simply. "But I won't kill innocents. Not anymore. We've made our point. The galaxy knows we can't be enslaved. Now we need to show them we're more than just destroyers." Chen felt something crack inside her chest. She looked at Li Mei's young face and saw her daughter. Not literally, Li Mei didn't look like her, but she saw the same hope, the same belief in something better, the same innocence that Chen had lost somewhere in the blood and ashes. "You think I want this?" Chen asked quietly. "You think I enjoy watching civilizations burn?" "I think you've forgotten how to stop," Li Mei replied. "I think you're so focused on revenge that you can't see we've already won. Earth is free. We have the strongest military in the galaxy. we can protect ourselves. But if we keep killing, we won't be protecting humanity. We'll be destroying what makes us human. Chen closed her eyes. For 5 years, she had run on nothing but hate and determination. She had pushed aside every doubt, every moment of hesitation, because stopping meant admitting that her daughter had died for revenge that would never satisfy the hole in her heart. She thought about the death tolls. 400 civilizations damaged or destroyed. Over 200 billion beings dead, entire species extinct. And it still wasn't enough. It would never be enough because her daughter was still dead and killing the galaxy wouldn't bring her back. "Admiral," Rivera said softly, "what are your orders?" Chen opened her eyes and looked at the faces around her. Rivera, who had lost his family. Tanaka, who had survived the breeding facilities. Kuzcut, who had seen their own species nearly destroy itself. And Li Mei, who somehow still had hope. "How many more attacks are scheduled for today?" Chen asked. 17, Rivera replied. "Cancel them," Chen said. "All of them." The room went silent with shock. "Ma'am?" Rivera said. "I said cancel them," Chen repeated. She looked at Kuzcut. "You said your species took 500 years to recover from isolation. How long did it take to end the isolation itself?" "We reached out to a younger species that had no memory of our atrocities," Kuzcut said. "We offered them technology and protection. We proved we could be more than weapons. It took 50 years to build that relationship, but it opened doors to others." Chen nodded slowly. She pulled up the Galactic display, showing the star systems in red that marked targeted civilizations. 447 species left to destroy. 846 that had voted for enslavement, or she could stop, right now, end the killing, find another way. "Here's what we're going to do," Chen said, her voice carrying the authority that had led humanity through 5 years of war. "Send a message on all consortium frequencies. Transmit it everywhere, every channel, every language." She took a breath, and when she spoke, it was with the weight of 200 billion deaths behind her words. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of Earth. For 5 years you enslaved us. 400 of your civilizations have paid the price for that decision. But we're stopping here, not because we can't continue, not because we lack the weapons, but because we choose to be better than you were." She paused, letting that sink in. Across the galaxy, on every remaining council world, species that had been preparing for death listened in shock. "Here are our terms, non-negotiable. First, every human slave will be returned to Earth immediately, all of them, regardless of location or contract. Second, the Galactic Council is dissolved, forever. No species has the right to judge another's fate. Third, reparations will be paid by every species that voted for our enslavement. Resources, technology, territory. You will pay for what you did." Chen's voice hardened. "Fourth, and most important, we are establishing a new role for humanity in this galaxy. We will be the Wardens of Liberty. Any species that enslaves another, that treats thinking beings as property, that forces civilizations into submission, will answer to us, and we will not show mercy twice." She leaned forward, and even through the holographic projection, her presence was overwhelming. "You called us primitive. You called us dangerous. You were right about the dangerous part. But here's what you didn't understand. Humans don't just destroy. We build. We create. We dream of better worlds. And now we're going to make this galaxy into something better than the nightmare you created." The transmission ended. Chen looked around the room at her officers, at the Vrex Elder, at Li Mei's face on the display. "Will they agree?" Tanaka asked. "They don't have a choice," Chen said. "We've destroyed 400 civilizations. We can destroy the rest. They know that." The question is whether they're willing to live under the threat of human retaliation or die fighting for their pride. Over the next week, the responses came in. Some species refused outright, preparing for final battles. Others immediately began gathering human slaves for return to Earth. Still others tried to negotiate, to find middle ground. Chen gave them 1 week. After that, attacks would resume. In the end, 422 species agreed to the terms. 24 refused and were systematically destroyed over the following months. The final count was 424 civilizations extinct or crippled. Over 230 billion beings dead, but the killing stopped. The human slaves came home. Ships arrived at Earth by the thousands, carrying humans who had been scattered across 200 worlds. Some were broken by years of suffering. Others had survived by becoming hard and cold. Children who didn't remember Earth. Old people who never thought they'd see it again. Li Mei stood at the processing center, watching the ships land. She had been assigned to help coordinate the return, using her experience as a former slave to understand what the returning humans needed. She saw faces that reminded her of her time in the mines, saw trauma in every eye, saw the cost of 5 years of slavery written on every body, but they were free. Damaged, hurting, traumatized, but free. A transport ship landed nearby and families began to emerge. Li Mei watched a young girl, maybe 7 years old, take her first steps on Earth. The child looked around in wonder, seeing her homeworld for the first time that she could remember. Li Mei walked over to the girl, kneeling down to her level. "Welcome home," she said. The girl looked at her with eyes that had seen too much. "Is it over? The bad people?" Li Mei thought about the 424 civilizations humanity had destroyed, the 230 billion dead, the galaxy that now feared and hated humanity. She thought about what they had become in their quest for freedom. "Yes," she said, because it was what the child needed to hear. "The bad people can't hurt us anymore." "Are we the bad people now?" the girl asked. Li Mei froze. The question was innocent, childlike, but it cut to the heart of everything. Were they? They had committed genocide on a scale the galaxy had never seen. They had killed billions. They had become exactly what they fought against, a species that used violence to impose its will on others. "I don't know," Li Mei said honestly, "but we're trying to be better." The girl nodded and walked away to join her family. Li Mei stood and looked up at the sky. It was blue and clear, no silver ships blocking the stars. They had won. Earth was free. Humanity would never be enslaved again. But the cost. 50 years passed. Li Mei, now an old woman of 69, sat in a garden on Earth, watching her grandchildren play. The galaxy had changed dramatically in those decades. The Galactic Council was gone, replaced by a loose federation of independent systems. Species traded carefully, always aware that humanity watched from Earth. No species had attempted to enslave another in 50 years. The Wardens of Liberty, as humanity had named themselves, had intervened in 3 conflicts where slavery was involved. Each intervention was swift, brutal, and absolute. The galaxy had learned the lesson, but humans were not loved. They were feared. Other species avoided Earth space, traded only when necessary, and never forgot the images of 400 burning civilizations. Humanity had saved the galaxy from slavery, but they had done it by becoming the galaxy's greatest monsters. Chen had died 10 years ago, finally succumbing to the cancer that had been growing in her for years. She never expressed regret for her decisions, but in her final days, she had told Li Mei something that stuck. "I saved humanity by sacrificing what made us human. History will judge whether that was worth it." Li Mei watched her grandchildren laugh and play. innocent and happy in a way she had never been at their age. They grew up in a galaxy where Earth was respected through fear, where humanity was powerful but isolated, where freedom came at the price of being eternally alone. One of her grandchildren, a boy of 8, came running up to her. "Grandma, teacher said humans destroyed 400 alien civilizations. Is that true?" Li Mei looked at his innocent face and felt the weight of 50 years pressed down on her. "Yes," she said, "it's true." "Why?" "Because they hurt us first, because we were angry and scared and wanted to make sure no one could hurt us again." "Did it work?" Li Mei thought about that question. Earth was free. Humans lived without fear of enslavement. Children like her grandson grew up safe, unaware of the nightmare their grandparents had endured. In that sense, yes, it worked. But humanity lived in a galaxy that feared them. They had no real allies, only species that complied out of terror. Human culture had become defined by that one act of revenge, overshadowing everything else they had achieved. They were the species that killed stars, that committed genocide, that showed no mercy. "Yes," she finally said, "but it cost us something important." "What?" "Friends," Li Mei said simply. "We won our freedom but lost the chance to be part of something bigger. We're powerful, but we're alone." Her grandson thought about that, then shrugged with the casual acceptance of children. "Maybe we can make friends now. It's been a long time." Li Mei smiled sadly. "Maybe. I hope you do. I hope your generation finds a way to be both strong and kind, to protect without destroying, to be powerful without being feared." As the sun set over Earth, Li Mei looked up at the stars beginning to appear. Real stars, in a real sky, above a free Earth. She had made that promise as a 7-year-old girl in Beijing, and humanity had kept it. They were free. But freedom wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of learning what to do with it. The galaxy had learned that humans couldn't be enslaved. Now, humanity had to learn how to be free without being monsters, how to be powerful without being hated, how to protect themselves without destroying everything around them. It would take generations, maybe centuries. But as Li Mei watched her grandchildren play beneath alien stars, she allowed herself to hope that they would find a way. They had survived 5 years of slavery. They had survived 50 years of revenge. Maybe, just maybe, they could survive peace. The story of Earth's enslavement had ended in fire and blood. The story of Earth's freedom was still being written, and perhaps one day it would be written in something other than ashes.